Adamson, you are unusually quiet today. Is everything all right?
No, everything is not all right.
What happened?
I am tired, Udoka. I am tired of pretending that I am happy with this situation.
What situation?
Our children.
Our daughters?
Yes, 4 daughters, Udoka. 4.
They are healthy, beautiful children. Why are you suddenly talking about them like they are a problem?
Because I wanted a son.
And you think I wanted only daughters too?
You are their mother.
Adamson, am I the one who decides whether a baby is born a boy or a girl?
Other women are giving their husbands sons. Why can't you give me one?
So after all these years, this is what you think of me?
I need someone to carry my name.
Your daughters carry your name too.
They will grow up and marry other men.
And does that make them less valuable? Do you remember when we first got married? You used to tell me that all you wanted was a happy family.
Things have changed.
No, Adamson, you have changed.
I have made up my mind.
About what?
I am going to marry another woman.
Because I gave you daughters?
Because I want a son.
And what happens to me?
You will remain here with your children.
So after everything we shared, I am no longer enough for you?
I need a son, Udoka.
One day, Adamson, you may realize that you were so busy searching for the child you wanted that you failed to appreciate the family you already had.
Udoka was the kind of woman people noticed the moment she walked into a room. She was in her early 30s, tall, elegant, hardworking, and naturally beautiful. Whenever she smiled, the little dimple on her cheek and the small gap between her front teeth made her look even more attractive. She did not depend on expensive clothes or heavy makeup to look beautiful because her confidence and kind heart made her stand out. Everyone who knew her respected her because she treated people with kindness whether they were rich or poor. She had worked hard for many years to build a successful career and earned enough money to take good care of herself. She lived in a neat apartment, paid her bills on time, and never asked anyone to solve her problems for her. At her office, her colleagues admired her because she was honest, respectful, and always ready to help others. Her boss often praised her dedication during staff meetings. One afternoon, after a successful presentation, her colleague Sarah smiled and said, "Udoka, I honestly don't know how you do it. You always finish your work before everyone else." Udoka laughed softly and replied, "There is no secret, Sarah. I simply believe that whatever is worth doing is worth doing well." Another colleague added, "Any man who marries you will be very lucky." Everyone laughed and Udoka jokingly shook her head. "Please, let me enjoy my peace first," she replied with a smile. Although many men admired her beauty, Udoka was never in a hurry to get married. She believed marriage was not just about love, but also about friendship, respect, trust, and understanding. She often told her close friends, "I would rather remain single than marry the wrong person." Her friends admired her patience because many women around her age were already under pressure from relatives to settle down. Whenever her mother called, she would gently ask, "My daughter, have you met anyone serious yet?" Udoka would always smile and answer, "Mom, when the right man comes, you will be the first person to know." Unknown to her, that right man was about to enter her life. Adamson was a tall, handsome man in his late 30s. He worked as a senior manager in a well-known multinational company and earned a very good salary because of his position. Despite his success, he was humble, respectful, and friendly. He believed that money meant nothing if a person lacked good character. Her colleagues admired him because he treated everyone equally, from the cleaners to the directors. One Friday evening, both Udoka and Adamson attended a leadership seminar organized by different companies in the city. During the break, participants gathered around the refreshment table to collect drinks and snacks. As Udoka reached for a bottle of water, another hand reached for it at the same time. She looked up and smiled politely. "I'm sorry," she said. The handsome stranger smiled back. "No, I should be the one apologizing." He picked another bottle and handed the first one to her. "Please, you can have this." "Thank you," Udoka replied. "You're welcome. My name is Adamson. I'm Udoka." They shook hands warmly before returning to the seminar hall. Throughout the program, Adamson found himself stealing quick glances at Udoka. There was something calm and genuine about her that caught his attention. After the seminar ended, he walked towards her. "Excuse me, Udoka." She turned around. "Oh, Adamson. I know this may sound sudden, but I really enjoyed talking to you during the break. Would you mind if we stayed in touch?" Udoka hesitated for a moment before smiling. "I don't see any problem with that." They exchanged phone numbers and went their separate ways. What started as simple phone conversations soon became regular calls every evening. They talked about work, family, dreams, childhood memories, and everything in between. Sometimes they laughed for hours over the smallest things. Weeks later, Adamson invited her out for dinner. During the meal, he looked into her eyes and said, "Udoka, I have met many people in my life, but I have never met anyone like you. Every conversation with you gives me peace." Udoka smiled shyly. "Thank you. I enjoy talking to you too." Their friendship slowly grew into love. Adamson admired Udoka's intelligence, kindness, and maturity, while Udoka admired Adamson's humility, patience, and caring nature. They never rushed their relationship. Instead, they took time to understand each other, discuss their future, and meet each other's families. When Adamson finally proposed, he did it in a simple but heartfelt way. One evening, while they were taking a walk through a quiet park, he stopped walking and looked at her. "Udoka, yes? Since you came into my life, I have become a happier man. I cannot imagine my future without you. Will you marry me?" Udoka covered her mouth in surprise as tears gathered in her eyes. "Are you serious?" Adamson smiled warmly. "I have never been more serious about anything in my life." Without thinking twice, Udoka nodded happily. "Yes, I will marry you." Adamson slipped the engagement ring onto her finger, and they embraced as people nearby applauded. Their families welcomed the relationship with joy because they could clearly see how much the couple loved and respected each other. A few months later, they celebrated a beautiful wedding surrounded by relatives, friends, neighbors, and colleagues. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt prayers. During the reception, many guests whispered to one another. "Look at them," one elderly woman said. "They truly love each other." Another guest smiled. "You can tell this marriage will last for many years." Even after the wedding ended, their love only became stronger. They settled into their new home and quickly developed beautiful routines that made every day special. Every morning before leaving for work, Adamson would kiss Udoka gently on the forehead. "Have a wonderful day, my beautiful wife." Udoka would smile. "You too, don't work too hard." Sometimes she packed his lunch herself, even though they could easily afford domestic help. Adamson appreciated every little thing she did. "Nobody makes stew the way you do," he would often say. Udoka would laugh and tease him. "You only say that because you are my husband." Every evening after work, they looked forward to seeing each other again. No matter how stressful their day had been, they always made time for one another. After dinner, they would sit together in their cozy living room. Udoka would gently rest her head on Adamson's shoulder while he wrapped one arm around her. They talked about everything that happened during the day. Adamson would say, "You won't believe what happened during today's meeting." Udoka would laugh. "Tell me everything." After listening carefully, she would share her own experiences from work. Sometimes they laughed until tears rolled down their faces over funny stories from the office. Other evenings, they watched television together, played simple games, or discussed the dreams they wanted to achieve as husband and wife. They spoke about traveling together, buying a bigger house someday, raising children with good values, and growing old side by side. Before going to bed every night, they held hands and prayed together, thanking God for bringing them into each other's lives and asking Him to continue blessing their marriage. Their neighbors often noticed the warmth that filled their home. Whenever Adamson returned from work, he never drove into the compound without smiling. If Udoka happened to be outside watering flowers or speaking with neighbors, he would wave happily before getting out of the car. Sometimes he carried her shopping bags without allowing her to lift anything. One evening, an elderly neighbor watched them laughing together as they walked into their house and smiled at her husband. "Those two remind me of us when we first got married," she said. Her husband nodded. "May God continue to keep their love strong." Even at work, people admired the relationship they shared. Adamson's colleagues often joked that he always looked happier after speaking to his wife during lunch breaks. One afternoon, a colleague laughed and asked, "Adamson, are you sure you people have not been married for only a few weeks?" Adamson smiled proudly. Love should not disappear because time passes. At Udoka's office, her friends also admired her marriage. Whenever she smiled while reading Adamson's messages during break time, they teased her affectionately. "Your husband has sent another sweet message, hasn't he?" She would blush and reply, "Maybe." Many people secretly wish they could experience the same kind of peaceful marriage. Young couples looked up to them, older couples admired the respect they showed each other, and neighbors often pointed at them as an example of what a happy home should look like. Some people prayed that one day they too would find a husband or wife who would love them with the same sincerity, while others simply admired them from a distance and thanked God that genuine love like theirs still existed. Exactly 1 year after their beautiful wedding, life continued to smile on Udoka and Adamson. Their home remained filled with laughter, peace, and understanding. Every morning they left for work together, and every evening they returned home eager to see each other again. Their neighbors still admired them, and their friends often said they had one of the happiest marriages anyone could wish for. One Saturday morning, Udoka woke up feeling unusually tired. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed, holding her head. Adamson noticed immediately and became worried. "Are you all right?" he asked softly as he sat beside her. Udoka smiled faintly and replied, "I don't know. I have been feeling tired for the past few days. I also feel a little sick this morning." Adamson gently placed his hand on her forehead. "You don't have a fever. Maybe we should go to the hospital." Udoka nodded. "I think that's a good idea." Within an hour, they arrived at the hospital. After several examinations, the doctor smiled warmly as he looked at both of them. "Congratulations," he said. "You are going to be parents." For a few seconds, both of them simply stared at the doctor as if they had not heard him correctly. Then, Udoka slowly turned to look at Adamson. Her eyes immediately filled with tears of happiness. Adamson could hardly believe the news. "Doctor, are you serious?" he asked excitedly. The doctor laughed softly. "Very serious. Your wife is pregnant." Adamson jumped to his feet and embraced Udoka tightly without caring that they were still inside the doctor's office. "Thank you, God," he shouted happily. Udoka laughed through her tears. "You are embarrassing me," she whispered. "I don't care," Adamson replied with a wide smile. "This is the happiest day of my life." The doctor smiled as he watched them. "Take good care of her. Make sure she eats healthy food, gets enough rest, attends every antenatal appointment, and avoids unnecessary stress." Adamson nodded repeatedly. "Doctor, don't worry. I will take very good care of her." As soon as they stepped outside the hospital, Adamson could not stop smiling. He held Udoka's hand as they walked slowly towards the car. "Can you believe we're going to become parents?" he asked. Udoka smiled warmly. "I still feel like I am dreaming." Adamson gently placed his hand on her stomach and whispered, "Our little baby is already making us so happy." Before driving home, he insisted on stopping at a restaurant to celebrate the good news. While they ate, he kept smiling at his wife. "You know something?" he asked. "What?" Udoka replied. "You have just made me the happiest man in the world." Udoka laughed softly. "The baby hasn't even arrived yet." Adamson smiled. "It doesn't matter. Knowing that we're going to become parents is enough for me." That same evening, they called both families to share the wonderful news. Immediately the phone calls ended, congratulations began pouring in from relatives and close friends. Udoka's mother became emotional. "My daughter, I have been praying for this day. May God protect both you and the baby." Adamson's parents were equally excited. His father proudly said, "Congratulations, my son. You are about to begin a new chapter of your life." The following Sunday after church, many members congratulated them as well. An elderly woman smiled and said, "May God bless your home with a healthy child." Adamson thanked everyone with a grateful heart. From that very day, he became even more protective of Udoka than he had ever been before. He refused to allow her to carry anything heavy. Whenever she reached for a bucket or tried to move furniture while cleaning, Adamson quickly stopped her. "No," he would say firmly but lovingly. "Leave that for me." Udoka would smile and shake her head. "Adamson, I am pregnant, not sick." He would laugh and reply, "To me, you are carrying our greatest treasure. I am not taking any chances." Every morning before leaving for work, he made sure she had eaten breakfast. Whenever she forgot to drink enough water, he reminded her. Sometimes he called her from the office simply to ask, "Have you eaten?" Udoka would laugh and answer, "Yes, I have." "Have you rested?" he would ask again. "Yes." "Promise me you are not stressing yourself." "I promise." On weekends, Adamson surprised everyone by doing almost every household chore himself. He washed dishes, cleaned the sitting room, mopped the floor, and even learned how to prepare some of Udoka's favorite meals. One Saturday afternoon, Udoka entered the kitchen and found Adamson wearing an apron while trying to cook. She burst into laughter. "What exactly are you doing?" she asked. Adamson turned around proudly. "Today I am the chef." Udoka walked closer and looked inside the pot. "Are you sure this food will be edible?" Adamson put one hand on his chest and pretended to be offended. "Madam, please respect the chef." Both of them laughed together until tears filled their eyes. Although the meal did not turn out perfectly, Udoka ate every spoonful because she appreciated the love behind the effort. Adamson accompanied her to every hospital appointment whenever his work schedule allowed. If an important meeting came up, he either rescheduled it or made arrangements to join her later. During each visit, he listened carefully as the doctors explained how the pregnancy was progressing. He asked questions about the baby's development, healthy foods, exercise, and anything else that would help protect his wife and unborn child. One afternoon, the doctor smiled after examining Udoka. "Everything is progressing normally. Both mother and baby are doing very well." Adamson released a deep sigh of relief. "Thank God," he whispered. On the drive home, he looked at Udoka and smiled. "Nothing matters to me more than seeing both of you healthy." Their neighbors also noticed how caring Adamson had become. One evening, as he carried several shopping bags into the house, while refusing to let Udoka hold even the lightest one, a neighbor smiled at another woman standing nearby. "Look at the way he treats his wife," she said. "That is real love." The other woman nodded. Every woman deserves a husband who cares like that. At work, Adamson became famous for talking about his unborn baby. During lunch breaks, he often showed his colleagues the latest ultrasound pictures. One afternoon, one of his colleagues laughed and said, "You haven't even met this baby yet, and you're already behaving like the proudest father in the world." Adamson smiled proudly. "Can you blame me? I have waited for this moment for a very long time." Although he never spoke about it openly, Adamson secretly carried one special dream inside his heart. Whenever he imagined the future, he always pictured himself holding the hand of a little boy. He imagined teaching him how to ride a bicycle, taking him to football matches, helping him with homework, and one day handing over everything he had worked so hard to build. Sometimes, while driving home from work, he found himself smiling as he imagined introducing his future son to business partners or taking him to his office. One day, he would quietly think to himself, "My son will continue everything I have started." Yet he never shared these thoughts with Udoka. He never told her how much he hoped their first child would be a boy because he believed everything would happen naturally. He never wanted to place unnecessary pressure on his wife, whom he loved deeply. As the months passed, Udoka's pregnancy became more visible and everyone around them became excited. Friends visited regularly with gifts for the unborn baby. Family members called almost every day to ask how she was feeling. Adamson remained by her side through every stage of the pregnancy. If she woke up in the middle of the night craving a particular meal, he never complained. Instead, he got dressed and drove out to find whatever she wanted. One rainy evening, around midnight, Udoka quietly said, "I suddenly feel like eating meat pie." Adamson looked at the clock. "Now?" She smiled apologetically. "I know it sounds funny." Adamson laughed as he reached for his car keys. "Stay here, I'll be back." Less than 40 minutes later, he returned with fresh meat pies and fruit juice. Udoka looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You really went out in this rain?" Adamson smiled as he handed her the food. "For you and our baby, I would do it 1,000 times. Finally, after 9 months of careful preparation, prayers and excitement, the long-awaited day arrived. Very early one morning, Udoka went into labor. Adamson rushed her to the hospital with his heart pounding. Throughout the journey, he kept holding her hand. "Everything will be all right," he whispered repeatedly. Several hours later, while Adamson waited anxiously outside the delivery room, Every passing minute felt like an hour. He paced up and down the hospital corridor, whispering silent prayers. Please, God, protect my wife and our baby. Suddenly, the delivery room door opened and a nurse walked towards him with a smile. Congratulations, she said. Your wife has delivered safely. Adamson's face lit up with joy. Thank God, he exclaimed. Then he quickly asked, Is it a boy? The nurse smiled gently before answering. It is a beautiful baby girl. For a brief moment, Adamson's smile faded. The dream he had secretly carried in his heart for months had not come true. A tiny shadow of disappointment crossed his face before he quickly caught himself. Almost immediately, he pushed the feeling aside and reminded himself that what truly mattered was that both his wife and baby were alive and healthy. Taking a deep breath, he smiled again and followed the nurse into the room. Udoka looked exhausted but happy as she cradled their newborn daughter. Adamson walked over, gently kissed her forehead and said softly, You have done so well. I am so proud of you. Tears filled Udoka's eyes as she smiled back. Adamson carefully carried the baby into his arms for the first time. He looked at her tiny face and smiled warmly. She is so beautiful, he whispered. Looking back at Udoka, he laughed softly and said, She looks exactly like you. Udoka smiled happily as she watched him admire their daughter. In that moment, the brief disappointment disappeared behind the joy of becoming a father. A few days later, after both mother and baby were discharged from the hospital, they returned home to begin their new life as parents. The house felt even warmer than before as they settled into their new routine with their daughter. After several heartfelt discussions, Udoka and Adamson mutually agreed that she would temporarily resign from her job and focus on raising their children while Adamson continued providing for the family. One evening, as they sat together after putting the baby to sleep, Adamson gently held Udoka's hands and said, Don't worry about work for now. Stay home, take care of our children, and enjoy this season of motherhood. When we have completed our family, you can return to your career whenever you are ready. I promise I will support you every step of the way. Udoka smiled gratefully. Thank you for always thinking about me. Adamson kissed her forehead and replied, We are a team. We will always make these decisions together. Life remained peaceful, filled with love, laughter, and gratitude as they adjusted to parenthood. Yet deep inside Adamson's heart, there were quiet moments when he found himself looking up to heaven and silently praying that whenever God blessed them with another child, that child would be the son he had always dreamed of. Several years passed after the birth of their first daughter, and their little girl became the center of joy in their home. She filled the house with laughter, tiny footsteps, endless questions, and the innocent happiness that only a child could bring. Udoka loved being a mother, and although she had left her job to care for her family, she never regretted the decision because she believed she was building a strong foundation for her child. Adamson also loved his daughter dearly. Whenever he returned home from work, she would run towards the door shouting, Daddy, Daddy! He would immediately bend down, carry her into his arms, spin her around and kiss her cheeks while she laughed happily. Sometimes, the three of them would sit together in the living room, watching cartoons, playing little games, or sharing dinner while talking about their day. Their neighbors still admired them because they appeared to be a happy family. One evening, while they were having dinner, Udoka smiled at Adamson and said, Our daughter is growing so fast. Adamson smiled as he watched the little girl trying to feed herself. Yes, he replied. It feels like only yesterday we brought her home from the hospital. Udoka looked at him lovingly. She has brought so much happiness into our lives. Adamson nodded. She truly has. Although he smiled, there was a quiet thought buried deep inside his heart that he never shared with anyone. Every now and then, whenever he saw fathers walking with their sons or heard his friends proudly talking about their boys, he found himself silently wishing that one day he too would have a son. He never mentioned it to Udoka because he did not want her to feel pressured. Instead, he kept those thoughts hidden inside his heart, believing that when the time came, God would naturally answer his prayer. A few months later, Udoka noticed she had been feeling tired more often than usual. One morning, after preparing breakfast, she sat quietly at the dining table. Adamson looked at her with concern. "You look exhausted," he said. Udoka smiled softly. "I have been feeling this way for a few days." Adamson looked at her carefully before suddenly smiling. "Could it be?" Udoka raised an eyebrow. "Could it be what?" Adamson laughed. "Maybe we should visit the hospital." Later that day, they visited their doctor, and after carrying out the necessary tests, the doctor smiled warmly. "Congratulations once again," he said. "Your wife is expecting another baby." Both of them smiled with excitement. Adamson held Udoka's hand tightly as they walked out of the hospital. "We are going to be parents again," he said happily. Udoka laughed. "Yes, we are." On their way home, they discussed baby names, possible room arrangements, and how excited their little daughter would become to become a big sister. That evening, they shared the good news with both families, who celebrated with joy. Adamson's mother prayed over the phone. May God protect both mother and baby. Udoka's parents were equally excited and promised to support them throughout the pregnancy. As the months passed, Adamson became caring once again, just as he had been during the first pregnancy. He refused to let Udoka carry heavy loads, accompanied her to antenatal appointments whenever he could, and made sure she rested properly. However, this pregnancy was slightly different inside his heart. Although he never spoke the words aloud, his expectations quietly became stronger with every passing month. Sometimes, when he was alone in his office, he found himself imagining a little boy running towards him after work. He pictured himself teaching his son how to ride a bicycle, helping him with homework, and one day taking him to the office to show him the company where he had spent many years working. He imagined introducing the boy to friends and proudly saying, "This is my son." These thoughts made him smile, and before leaving his office each evening, he often whispered a silent prayer. "God, if it is your will, please bless me with a son this time." He never discussed these prayers with Udoka because he believed everything would happen naturally. He never wanted her to think he would be unhappy if another girl arrived. Meanwhile, Udoka simply prayed for a healthy baby. One evening, while they were preparing for bed, she gently rubbed her growing stomach and smiled. "I don't really mind whether it is a boy or a girl," she said. "As long as the baby is healthy, I will be grateful." Adamson smiled gently. "Yes, a healthy baby is important." His answer sounded normal, but inside himself, he quietly added another sentence that never left his lips. "I truly hope it is a boy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and their first daughter became excited about meeting their younger sibling. Every day, she kissed her mother's stomach and asked innocent questions. "Mommy, when will the baby come?" Udoka would laugh. "Very soon." "Can I play with the baby?" "Of course." Adamson often watched these moments with a smile, but each day his expectations continued to grow stronger. As the delivery date drew closer, he became increasingly anxious. On several occasions, friends jokingly asked him what he was expecting. One colleague smiled during lunch break and said, "So, Adamson, is it another princess, or are you finally getting your football partner?" Adamson laughed politely. "We will find out soon." Although he laughed, those words remained in his mind for the rest of the day. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived. Very early one morning, Udoka went into labor. Adamson quickly drove her to the hospital, encouraging her throughout the journey. "Everything will be all right," he kept saying. Hours later, he stood outside the delivery room once again, pacing up and down the corridor just as he had done years earlier. His heart beat faster with every passing minute. This time, however, one particular thought refused to leave his mind. "Please, Lord," he silently prayed, "if it is possible, let it be a boy." Suddenly, the delivery room door opened and a nurse walked towards him with a warm smile. "Congratulations," she said. Adamson immediately stood up. "Thank you. Is my wife all right?" "Yes," the nurse replied. "Both mother and baby are healthy." Adamson smiled with relief before asking the question that had been occupying his mind for months. "Is it a boy?" The nurse smiled kindly. "No, it's a beautiful baby girl." For a few seconds, Adamson simply stood there without saying anything. His smile faded slightly before he quickly forced it back onto his face. "Thank God they are healthy," he finally replied. The nurse nodded before leading him into the room. Udoka looked tired but joyful as she held their newborn daughter close to her chest. The moment she saw Adamson, she smiled. "Look at our beautiful baby." Adamson walked over slowly, kissed her forehead and forced a smile. "You did well," he said gently. "Thank you." He carefully carried the baby into his arms and looked at her tiny face. "She is beautiful," he whispered. He smiled at Udoka and congratulated her, but somewhere deep inside him, disappointment quietly settled into his heart. He hated himself for feeling that way because he knew both his wife and daughter were healthy, and that alone should have made him completely happy. Yet the dream he had secretly carried for years had once again remained unfulfilled. A few days later, they returned home and settled into life with two little daughters. Outwardly, nothing seemed different. Adamson continued going to work every morning, paid the household bills, bought everything the children needed, and remained a responsible husband and father. However, something inside him had begun to change so slowly that nobody noticed it at first, not even Udoka. The evenings that had once been filled with laughter gradually became quieter. Instead of sitting together for hours discussing their day, Adamson sometimes sat silently, staring at the television without really watching it. When Udoka tried to start conversations, his replies became shorter than before. One evening, she smiled and asked, "How was work today?" Adamson replied without looking at her, "It was fine." She waited for him to continue, as he normally would, but he said nothing else. After a few moments, she gently asked, "Did something happen?" Adamson shook his head. "No, I am just tired." Udoka accepted the explanation, believing work was becoming more stressful. Weeks passed and the pattern continued. Sometimes they finished dinner in complete silence. The playful teasing that once filled their home became less frequent. Their long conversations slowly disappeared. Udoka often lay awake at night wondering what had changed. One evening, she gently held Adamson's hand and asked, "Have I done something to upset you?" Adamson immediately looked at her. "No, why would you ask that?" "Because you don't smile the way you used to," Udoka replied softly. "You hardly talk anymore. I feel like something is bothering you." Adamson forced a smile. "Nothing is wrong. Work has simply been stressful." Udoka nodded, even though she was not completely convinced. She wanted to believe him because she trusted her husband. At work, however, Collins, Adamson's closest friend and colleague, noticed the difference almost immediately. They had worked together for several years and knew each other very well. One afternoon during lunch break, Collins looked across the table and said, "Adamson, can I ask you something?" Adamson looked up. "Go ahead." Collins leaned forward slightly. "What is going on with you?" Adamson frowned. "What do you mean?" Collins smiled gently. "You are not the same person anymore. You hardly laugh, you look worried almost every day. Even during meetings, your mind seems to be somewhere else. Is everything all right at home?" Adamson remained silent for a few seconds before sighing deeply. "Everything is fine." Collins shook his head. "No, my friend, I know you too well. Something is troubling you." Adamson lowered his eyes before speaking quietly. "I have two beautiful daughters." Collins smiled. "Yes, and they are lovely children." Adamson sighed again. "That is the problem." Collins looked confused. "Problem? What problem?" Adamson spoke honestly for the first time. "I wanted a son, Collins. I truly believed this second baby would be a boy. I don't understand why it keeps happening this way." Collins looked at him with sympathy before speaking calmly. "Adamson, listen to me carefully. Every child is a blessing from God. Whether a boy or a girl, they are all precious." Adamson remained silent. Collins continued, "Besides, you know very well that the mother does not choose whether the baby will be a boy or a girl." Adamson slowly shook his head. "I know what science says, but tell me this. Other men have sons. Why can't my own wife give me one?" Collins looked disappointed by the question. Your wife has given you 2 healthy children and has stood beside you faithfully. Please, don't allow this desire to blind you to the blessings you already have. Adamson leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. It is easy for you to say because you are not in my position. Collins sighed quietly. I am only telling you the truth because I care about you. Adamson said nothing else. Although he continued providing for his family, going to work every day, paying the bills and carrying out his responsibilities as a husband and father, something inside him had undeniably changed. The disappointment he had tried to hide after the birth of his second daughter slowly settled deeper into his heart, and little by little the affection that once defined their marriage began to give way to a quiet sadness that neither he nor Udoka fully understood, marking the beginning of a painful change that would eventually alter the course of their once beautiful family. Few years passed after the birth of their second daughter, and although Adamson continued to provide for his family, the warmth that had once filled their home slowly faded away. He still went to work every morning, paid the household bills, and made sure there was food on the table, but his heart was no longer as cheerful as it had once been. Udoka noticed the change every single day. The man who once rushed home after work because he could not wait to see his family now spent longer hours at the office, often arriving home late with one excuse after another. When he entered the house, he no longer greeted everyone with excitement. Instead, he simply nodded, sat quietly, ate his dinner, and retired to the bedroom. The long conversations they once enjoyed disappeared almost completely. Their daughters often wondered why their father no longer laughed with them the way he used to. Sometimes the little girls would run towards him shouting, "Daddy is home!" But instead of lifting them into his arms like before, he would simply pat their heads and say, "Go and let me rest, I am tired." The children did not understand what had changed, but Udoka understood that something was slowly stealing the joy from their home. She prayed constantly that whatever was troubling her husband would pass. One evening, after putting the children to bed, she sat beside Adamson in the living room just as she had used to in the early days of their marriage. She gently rested her head on his shoulder, hoping they could talk the way they once did. Adamson quietly shifted his body and stood up without saying a word. Udoka looked at him with surprise. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly. Adamson sighed deeply. "No." "Then why do you keep pushing me away?" she asked. Adamson remained silent for a few moments before saying, "I am just tired." Udoka watched him walk into the bedroom, and for the first time in many years, she cried alone in the sitting room. She could not understand why the man who once treated her like a queen now behaved as though her presence no longer mattered. Months later, Udoka discovered she was pregnant again. Although the pregnancy came as a blessing, she noticed that Adamson's reaction was very different from before. During her previous pregnancies, he had celebrated with excitement, but this time he simply smiled and said, "I hope this one will finally be a boy." Udoka looked at him quietly before replying, "Whatever God gives us will be enough." Adamson forced a smile. "Yes, of course." Throughout the pregnancy, he still provided everything she needed, but the excitement was no longer there. He attended fewer hospital appointments because he claimed work had become busier. He still cared for her, but his kindness no longer carried the same warmth. Every now and then, he caught him staring into space with a serious expression. One afternoon, while folding the baby's clothes, Udoka smiled and asked, "What are you thinking about?" Adamson answered honestly, "I keep praying that this baby will be a boy." Udoka gently held his hand. "Please, don't think too much about it. Whether it is a boy or a girl, the child will still be ours." Adamson nodded without saying another word. Finally, the day of delivery arrived. After several hours in labor, Udoka safely gave birth to another healthy baby girl. The doctor congratulated Adamson with a smile. "Your wife has done wonderfully. Mother and baby are both healthy." Adamson smiled politely and thanked the doctor, but inside his heart, he felt crushed once again. He entered the hospital room and looked at Udoka holding their newborn daughter. Udoka smiled weakly. "Look at how beautiful she is." Adamson forced a smile and kissed his wife's forehead. "Thank God both of you are safe." He carried the baby for a few moments before handing her back to Udoka. Although he tried to hide his disappointment, Udoka noticed that something was wrong. She did not ask any questions because she already knew the answer. A few days later, they returned home and life continued, but Adamson became even quieter than before. The house that once was filled with laughter now felt strangely empty, even though it was full of children. Weeks turned into months, and instead of accepting his family as God's blessing, Adamson allowed disappointment to grow inside his heart like a dangerous seed. Every time he saw a father walking proudly with his son, he became unhappy. Whenever friends celebrated the birth of baby boys, he congratulated them with a smile, but inside, he questioned why his own life was different. One evening after work, he arrived home looking upset. Udoka immediately noticed his mood. "Welcome home," she said gently. Adamson placed his briefcase on the table without replying. She followed him into the dining room. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Adamson suddenly turned towards her. "Tell me something." Udoka looked confused. "What is it? Why can you only give me daughters?" Udoka stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" Adamson shook his head angrily. "I don't know anymore." Tears gathered in Udoka's eyes. "Please, don't say that. Have I not given you beautiful children? Are they not healthy? Are they not growing well?" Adamson remained silent. Time continued to pass, and before long, Udoka became pregnant once again. She prayed every day that this pregnancy would somehow restore peace to her family. She hoped that if the baby happened to be a boy, her husband would become the loving man she had married years earlier. Throughout the pregnancy, she remained hopeful, while Adamson quietly convinced himself that this time his prayer would surely be answered. "This one must be a boy," he often whispered to himself. "It has to be." But when the day of delivery finally arrived, history repeated itself once again. Udoka safely gave birth to another healthy baby girl. The doctor congratulated the family, but Adamson felt completely defeated. Although he thanked God that both mother and child were alive, he could no longer hide the frustration burning inside him. After they returned home, his disappointment exploded into open anger. One evening, while the children were asleep, he looked at Udoka and said bitterly, "How is it possible that all you give me are daughters?" Udoka looked at him with tears already forming in her eyes. "Adamson, please," he interrupted her. "Don't tell me it is God's will again." Udoka took a deep breath. "It truly is not in my hands. No woman chooses the gender of her children." Adamson laughed bitterly, then explained something to me. "Are the women giving birth to sons different from you? Do they have two heads?" Udoka wiped her tears. "Please, stop comparing me with other women." Adamson continued speaking. "4 daughters, Udoka. 4. Tell me, who will carry my name? Who will inherit everything I have worked for? These girls will one day get married and leave this house. Then what happens to everything I have built?" Udoka cried openly. "Our daughters are not a mistake. They are blessings." Adamson shook his head. "You don't understand how a man feels." Udoka looked straight into his eyes. "And you don't understand how much your words are hurting me." From that day onward, arguments became a regular part of their home. Sometimes the children woke up at night because they heard their parents shouting. The neighbors who once admired their marriage slowly realized that something was terribly wrong. The same couple people once pointed to as an example of true love now lived under constant tension. Whenever relatives visited, Adamson complained openly about not having a son. Some older family members tried to advise him. One elderly uncle gently said, "My son, children are gifts from God. Be thankful for what he has given you." Adamson replied stubbornly, "Uncle, you already have sons. You cannot understand how I feel." Even Collins continued trying to help him. One afternoon at work, he said, "Adamson, please let this matter go. You are destroying your own happiness." Adamson looked angrily at him. "Easy for you to say." Collins sighed deeply. "Your wife has done nothing wrong. She has stood by you through everything." Adamson replied, "I need someone who will give me a son." Collins looked disappointed. "Listen to yourself. The woman you once called the love of your life has suddenly become worthless to you simply because she gave birth to daughters. That is not fair." Adamson refused to listen. His obsession had completely taken over his heart. Every beautiful memory he had shared with Udoka slowly disappeared behind his desperate desire for a male child. He no longer saw the faithful wife who had loved him from the beginning. He no longer appreciated the sacrifices she had made by leaving her career to raise their children. All he could think about was the son he believed he deserved. One evening, after another heated argument, Adamson sat alone in the living room for several hours. He thought about everything that had happened over the years, and instead of accepting his family as God's blessing, he convinced himself that there was only one solution to his problem. The following morning, he called a family meeting with some close relatives. Udoka sat quietly, confused about why everyone had been invited. After everyone settled down, Adamson cleared his throat and spoke without hesitation. "I have made up my mind," he announced. "I am going to marry another wife." The room became completely silent. Udoka stared at him in shock, unable to believe what she had just heard. One of the elderly relatives immediately asked, "Adamson, why would you do such a thing after all these years?" Adamson answered boldly, "Because I need a son. I have waited long enough. Since Udoka cannot give me one, I will marry another woman who can." Tears streamed freely down Udoka's face as she looked at the man she had loved with all her heart. She wanted to speak, but no words came out. Every promise they had made to each other on their wedding day echoed painfully in her mind. She realized that the husband who once adored her had slowly allowed his obsession to destroy the love they had shared. And despite her tears, prayers, faithfulness, and sacrifices, she could do nothing but watch Adamson walk away from the vows they had once made before God and everyone who loved them, determined to marry a second wife named Ogechi because he believed only another woman could give him the son he desired. A few months after Adamson married Ogechi, life inside the once peaceful home changed completely. Although Udoka remained respectful and continued caring for her 4 daughters, she no longer felt like the woman of the house. She moved around quietly, avoiding unnecessary arguments because she still hoped that one day her husband would realize how much pain he had caused her family. Adamson, however, appeared completely focused on his new wife. He spent more time with Ogechi, bought her expensive clothes, jewelry, and gifts, and rarely spoke kindly to Udoka anymore. Whenever neighbors saw the situation, they whispered among themselves. Some pitied Udoka, while others shook their heads in disappointment. One elderly neighbor sighed and said to another woman, "This is not the same man we used to admire. Something has changed him completely." The other woman nodded sadly. Obsession can make a good person forget what truly matters. Despite everything, Udoka refused to fight Ogechi. She believed that shouting, insulting, or creating drama would only make life harder for her daughters. Instead, she focused all her attention on raising her children with love and good manners. Every night before they slept, she gathered the girls together and prayed with them. "Always remember," she would say gently, "no matter what happens around us, never allow hatred to enter your hearts." Her eldest daughter looked at her one evening and asked innocently, "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy laugh with us anymore?" Udoka forced a smile, even though her heart was breaking. She gently stroked her hair and replied, "Daddy has many things on his mind. Keep praying for him." Deep inside, however, she knew the real reason. Adamson's heart had completely changed. Not long after the marriage, exciting news filled the house again. Ogechi discovered she was pregnant. The moment Adamson heard the news, he could hardly hide his excitement. He immediately carried Ogechi into his arms and laughed loudly. "This is it!" he shouted happily. "I know this time my dream will finally come true." Ogechi smiled proudly. "Don't worry. I believe I will give you the son you have always wanted." Adamson held both of her hands and replied, "You don't know how happy you have made me today." From that day onward, Adamson treated Ogechi with extraordinary care. He drove her to every hospital appointment himself, bought her expensive maternity clothes, hired a house helper so she would not lift a finger, and constantly reminded everyone that she was carrying his future. Whenever relatives visited, he proudly announced, "Very soon my son will arrive." Some relatives smiled politely, while others felt uncomfortable because they remembered how he had treated Udoka simply for giving birth to daughters. Collins also heard the news at work. During lunch break, he quietly asked Adamson, "How is your family?" Adamson smiled proudly. "Everything is going well. Ogechi is pregnant." Collins congratulated him. "That is good news. I pray both mother and baby remain healthy." Adamson leaned closer and whispered confidently, "This one is definitely my son." Collins looked at him carefully before replying, "Whether it is a son or a daughter, just thank God for a healthy child." Adamson laughed loudly. "No, Collins, this time I know it will be a boy." Collins sighed quietly, but said nothing more because he realized his friend no longer wanted advice. As the months passed, Adamson became more excited than ever before. He began shopping for baby clothes long before the delivery date. Surprisingly, most of the clothes he bought were blue. One Saturday afternoon, Ogechi laughed as she looked through the shopping bags. "What if the baby turns out to be a girl?" she joked. Adamson immediately shook his head. "Impossible." Ogechi smiled. "How can you be so sure?" Adamson placed one hand gently on her stomach. "Because I have prayed for this for years. God will answer me this time." Meanwhile, Udoka quietly watched everything happening around her. She noticed how much attention Adamson gave Ogechi and remembered how differently he had treated her during her own pregnancies after the birth of their first daughter. Although the memories hurt her deeply, she remained silent. She refused to allow bitterness to control her heart. Every night she simply prayed, "God, please give me the strength to endure whatever lies ahead." Finally, after many months of waiting, the day of delivery arrived. Very early that morning, Ogechi went into labor and Adamson rushed her to the hospital. Unlike previous deliveries, he looked extremely nervous, not only because he wanted both mother and baby to be safe, but because he desperately wanted the child to be a boy. As he waited outside the delivery room, he walked up and down the corridor repeatedly. "Please, God, please let this be my son," he whispered. After what felt like endless hours, the doctor finally came out with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Adamson." Adamson quickly stood up. "Thank you, doctor. How is my wife?" "She is doing very well." Adamson immediately asked the question that had consumed his heart for years. "What about the baby?" The doctor smiled warmly before replying, "You have a healthy baby boy." For a moment, Adamson simply stood there with tears of joy in his eyes. Then he lifted both hands towards the sky and shouted, "Thank you, God!" Nurses nearby smiled as they watched his reaction. Adamson laughed loudly and hugged the doctor without thinking. Thank you," he kept repeating. He rushed into the hospital room where Ogechi lay smiling weakly with the newborn wrapped in a soft blanket. Adamson carefully carried the baby into his arms, his hands trembling with excitement. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he looked at the tiny face. "My son," he whispered repeatedly. "My son." He looked at Ogechi with overwhelming happiness. "You have made me the happiest man alive." Ogechi smiled proudly. "I told you everything would be all right." Adamson leaned over and kissed her forehead. "You have given me the greatest gift anyone can ever give me." Before leaving the hospital, he proudly announced the baby's name. "His name shall be Kingsley." Immediately after the news spread, friends, relatives, neighbors, and colleagues began congratulating him. Adamson organized a lavish naming celebration unlike anything he had done before. The compound was decorated beautifully, expensive food was served, musicians entertained the guests, and everyone talked about the arrival of his long-awaited son. During the celebration, Adamson proudly carried Kingsley around, introducing him to every guest. "Meet my son," he said over and over again. "My heir." Some people congratulated him sincerely, while others quietly remembered the pain Udoka had suffered because of his obsession. Collins attended the celebration but remained unusually quiet. As he watched Adamson celebrating, he silently prayed that his friend would not forget the wife and daughters who had stood by him for many years. Sadly, the opposite happened. From the moment Ogechi and baby Kingsley returned home, Adamson's treatment of Udoka became even more painful than before. Every opportunity became another excuse to compare the two women. One afternoon, While everyone sat in the dining room, Adamson looked directly at Udoka and said, "Do you see now? What you could not do, Ogechi did without any struggle." Udoka lowered her head and remained silent. Adamson continued speaking. "For years I waited for a son. Years! But she gave me one almost immediately." Ogechi smiled proudly but said nothing. Another day, while relatives were visiting, Adamson laughed and said loudly, "Now I finally have someone who will carry my name." Udoka felt every word pierce her heart like a knife. The visitors became uncomfortable, but nobody knew what to say. Instead of appreciating the 4 daughters God had already blessed him with, Adamson began insulting them openly. One evening, after returning from work, he found the girls playing in the sitting room. Irritated for no reason, he shouted, "Why are all of you making noise? Every time I come home, all I see are girls everywhere." The children immediately became quiet. Their eldest daughter looked at him with frightened eyes and quietly gathered her younger sisters. As they walked away, the youngest whispered softly, "Did we do something wrong?" Her older sister shook her head sadly but could not answer because she did not understand their father's behavior either. As weeks turned into months, Adamson's insults became more frequent. During arguments with Udoka, he said hurtful things that no loving husband should ever say. "You failed me," he shouted one evening. "You couldn't even give me one son." Udoka cried openly. "Adamson, please stop saying that. I never chose the gender of our children." Adamson ignored her tears. "Ogechi proved that it was possible. She is the woman who gave me what I wanted." He even mocked his own daughters. "All these girls do is eat my food and spend my money. What benefit are they to me?" Udoka immediately defended them. "They are your children. Please don't speak about them that way." Adamson replied harshly, "They are useless to my family name." The words broke Udoka's heart completely. One morning, after another heated argument, Adamson made a decision that shocked everyone. Standing in the middle of the living room, he pointed towards the back of the compound. "From today," he announced coldly, "you and your daughters will no longer stay in this house." Udoka stared in disbelief. "What are you saying?" Adamson replied firmly, "Pack your belongings. All of you will move into the boys' quarters behind this building." Tears immediately filled Udoka's eyes. "Adamson, please don't do this." He refused to listen. "This main house is for me, Ogechi, and my son. You and your daughters can stay in the boys' quarters." The little girls watched in confusion as their mother silently packed their clothes. They did not fully understand what was happening, but they could see their mother's tears. Together, they carried their few belongings into the old boys' quarters behind the compound. The building was small, old, poorly ventilated, and badly maintained. During heavy rain, water leaked through parts of the roof. The rooms were cramped, the furniture was worn out, and there was barely enough space for all 5 of them to sleep comfortably. As Udoka arranged her few possessions inside the tiny room, she quietly wiped away her tears so her daughters would not lose hope. She smiled at them and said, "We will be all right." Although she sounded confident, her heart was breaking. From that day onward, life inside the boys' quarters became extremely difficult. Every morning, the girls watched Adamson, Ogechi, and Kingsley living comfortably inside the main house while they struggled with very little. Whenever Adamson left for work, Ogechi often walked over to the boys' quarters looking for another opportunity to humiliate Udoka. One afternoon, she stood at the doorway with a proud smile and said, "So this is where you truly belong." Udoka remained silent. Ogechi laughed softly. "Don't look so sad. You should be grateful I even allow you to stay on this property." Udoka quietly replied, "I don't want any trouble." Ogechi folded her arms. "Of course you don't. After all, I am now the real wife. I am the one who gave Adamson the son he wanted. That is why I deserve the main house while you stay here." She laughed and walked away, leaving Udoka standing there with tears rolling down her face. As if the humiliation was not enough, Adamson gradually stopped providing money for Udoka and her daughters. At first, he delayed giving money for food, then he stopped paying school fees on time, refused to buy clothes for the girls, ignored their medical needs whenever they became sick, and acted as if they were no longer his responsibility. With no other choice, Udoka began using the little savings she had managed to keep from the years she worked before leaving her career, hoping the money would be enough to feed her daughters, pay their school fees, buy their clothes, and keep them alive, while silently praying that somehow God would make a way for them before every last penny she had painfully saved was gone. Life in the boys' quarters became harder with each passing day. The small building that Udoka and her 4 daughters now called home was nothing like the comfortable house they had once lived in. The roof leaked whenever it rained, the walls had begun to crack, and the tiny rooms became unbearably hot during the afternoon. Every morning, Udoka woke up before sunrise to prepare her daughters for school. She made sure they bathed, wore their clean uniforms, and ate whatever little food she could provide before they left. Although she smiled in front of them every day, her heart was filled with pain because she knew they deserved a much better life. She often stood at the doorway after the girls had left for school, watching them walk away with their worn-out school bags, silently praying that God would protect them and change their story one day. At first, she survived with the little money she had managed to save before she resigned from her office job years earlier. Whenever Adamson refused to provide food or school fees, she quietly dipped into those savings. She never complained because she believed that one day her husband would come to his senses and remember that the 4 girls were also his children. Every week, she withdrew a little money to buy food, pay school fees, replace worn-out sandals, buy exercise books, and settle small medical bills whenever one of the children became ill. But as the months passed, the savings grew smaller and smaller. One evening, after returning from the market, she opened the small metal box where she kept the money. She counted the remaining notes several times before tears slowly filled her eyes. "This cannot be all that is left," she whispered to herself. She counted again, hoping she had made a mistake, but the result remained the same. The money that had once given her hope was almost gone. She sat quietly on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty box. "What am I going to do now?" she asked softly as tears rolled down her cheeks. Just then, her eldest daughter Chioma walked into the room. "Mommy," she called gently. Udoka quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile. "Yes, my dear." Chioma looked carefully. "Have you been crying?" Udoka immediately shook her head. "No, my dear." Dust entered my eyes. Chioma was old enough to know her mother was not telling the truth, but she chose not to ask more questions. Instead, she hugged her tightly. "Everything will be all right, Mommy." Udoka smiled weakly and kissed her forehead. "Yes, my daughter, God is with us." That night, after all 4 girls had fallen asleep on the small mattresses spread across the room, Udoka remained awake. She knelt beside her bed and prayed quietly. "Father, I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know where the next meal will come from, but please, don't let my children suffer because of the mistakes of adults. Give me strength. Show me what to do." After praying, she sat silently for a long time thinking about her future. She knew she could no longer depend on Adamson because each passing day made it clearer that he had abandoned her and the children completely. The following morning, she made a difficult decision. "I cannot sit here waiting for help that may never come," she told herself. "If I truly love my daughters, I must fight for them." At first, she thought about returning to office work, but almost immediately she realized it would be difficult. She had spent several years away from her career raising children, and more importantly, she had nobody she trusted enough to leave the girls with every day. Ogechi had made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with them, and Udoka feared leaving the children alone in the boys' quarters while she traveled far to work. She sighed deeply. "I need work that will allow me to stay close to my children." The next morning, after dropping the girls at school, Udoka began walking from one house to another inside the estate. At the first house, she knocked gently on the gate. A middle-aged woman opened it. "Good morning," Udoka said politely. "Good morning." Please, I wanted to ask if you need someone to help clean your compound or wash clothes. The woman looked at her with surprise. Have you done this kind of work before? Udoka smiled humbly. No, but I am willing to learn. I just need honest work. The woman shook her head apologetically. I already have someone. Thank you, ma, Udoka replied, before walking away. She continued moving from house to house under the hot sun. Some people turned her away immediately. Others simply said they did not need help. By afternoon, her legs were aching and sweat covered her face. She almost gave up, but she remembered the faces of her daughters waiting at home. I cannot stop now, she whispered to herself. At another compound, an elderly woman listened patiently as Udoka explained her situation. I need someone to sweep my compound 3 times a week, the woman said. Can you do that? Udoka's face immediately brightened. Yes, ma, I can. I also need someone to wash my curtains once every month. Udoka smiled gratefully. Thank you very much. I promise I will not disappoint. That small opportunity became the beginning of a new chapter in her life. As the days passed, more people noticed how hardworking and trustworthy she was. Whenever she finished cleaning a compound, the place looked spotless. Whenever she washed clothes, they were neatly folded and arranged. Soon, one customer recommended her to another. Before long, she had several small jobs around the estate. Every morning, after the children left for school, Udoka swept compounds, washed clothes by hand until her fingers became sore, cleaned sitting rooms, kitchens and bathrooms, cooked meals for busy families, and even helped elderly residents buy groceries from the market. Sometimes she carried heavy bags on her head while walking long distances under the scorching sun. Other days, she spent hours scrubbing stubborn stains from floors until her back ached. Yet she never complained, because every pound she earned meant food on the table and another chance to keep her daughters in school. One afternoon, while she was washing clothes outside a large house, another worker looked at her and asked, Madam, weren't you once working in an office? Udoka smiled gently. Yes. The woman looked surprised. Then how did you end up doing this? Udoka paused for a moment before replying quietly. Life sometimes changes in ways we never expect, but honest work is never something to be ashamed of. The woman smiled with admiration. You are a very strong woman. Udoka simply nodded and continued washing the clothes. Every evening, she returned home completely exhausted. Her hands often hurt from washing clothes all day. Her legs ached from walking long distances, and her back felt stiff from carrying heavy loads. Sometimes she entered the boys' quarters so tired that she could barely stand. Yet the moment her daughter saw her, she forced herself to smile. Mommy! They shouted happily as they ran to hug her. How was your day? Chioma would ask. Udoka smiled warmly. It was good. Are you tired? Little Onye asked one evening. Udoka laughed softly. Just a little. The girls quickly helped remove the basket from her head and brought her water to drink. Watching them care for her filled her heart with both pride and sadness. After preparing dinner together, they all sat on the floor to eat because they had very little furniture. Although the meal was sometimes simple, Udoka always thanked God before they ate. Father, thank you for providing for us today, she prayed. May tomorrow be even better. After dinner, she gathered her daughters around her every single night. She made sure they completed their homework before speaking to them. Listen to me carefully, she said one evening. No matter how difficult life becomes, never stop studying. Education is something nobody can ever steal from you. Chioma nodded seriously. We understand, Mommy. Udoka continued. Always respect people, even those who hurt you. Don't fight. Don't insult anyone. Let your good character speak for you. Ujunwa raised her hand. Mommy, why does Daddy no longer love us? The question pierced Udoka's heart like a sharp knife. She remained silent for a few seconds before gently answering. Your father is going through his own struggles, but never hate him. Hatred only destroys the person carrying it. Chidinma looked confused. "But he always shouts at us." Udoka smiled sadly. "I know, my dear, but promise me something." "What is it?" the girls asked together. "Promise me that you will never believe you are less important because you are girls." All four daughters nodded. Udoka continued speaking with tears in her eyes. "Always remember this. Your value does not depend on whether you are a boy or a girl. God created every one of you for a purpose. Never allow anyone to tell you that you are not enough." The girls quietly hugged their mother. As they held each other, Udoka silently prayed that those words would remain in their hearts forever. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, she sat alone outside the boys' quarters looking at the stars. She remembered the beautiful life she once shared with Adamson, the laughter, the conversations, the dreams they built together, and wondered how everything had changed so completely. She wiped away her tears before whispering to herself, "I cannot change yesterday, but I can fight for tomorrow." From that night onward, she made herself one solemn promise. No matter how many compounds she had to sweep, no matter how many clothes she had to wash, no matter how many meals she had to cook for strangers, or errands she had to run under the hot sun, she would never give up. She would work until her hands became rough, her feet became sore, and her body became exhausted, if that was what it took to give her daughters a better future. She silently vowed that one day, Chioma, Ujunwa, Chidino, and Onye would grow into successful women who would never have to depend on anyone for their worth. And from that moment onward, she poured every ounce of her strength, every prayer, every sacrifice, and every drop of hope she had left into making that promise become a reality. The years passed quietly, and time slowly changed the little girls who once slept together on thin mattresses inside the boys' quarters into young ladies with big dreams and kind hearts. Life was still difficult for Udoka and her daughters, but the hardship that was meant to break them only made them stronger. Every morning before the sun came up, the girls woke early without being reminded. Chioma, the eldest, swept the compound around the boys' quarters, while Ujunma fetched water. Chidinma helped prepare breakfast, and little Onye carefully arranged their books and uniforms before everyone left for school. They worked together like one team because they knew their mother was carrying a heavy burden. Whenever Udoka returned home tired after spending the whole day cleaning houses or washing clothes, she often found the small room already neat and the evening meal almost ready. One evening, as she entered the boys' quarters carrying a basket on her head, Chioma quickly rushed over. "Mommy, let me carry that for you," she said. Udoka smiled. "Thank you, my daughter." Ujunwa brought her a cup of water while Chidinma gently rubbed her mother's shoulders. Onye smiled brightly and said, "Mommy, we finished our homework before you came home." Tears filled Udoka's eyes as she looked at her daughters. "God has truly blessed me with good children," she whispered. Chioma smiled and held her mother's hands. "No, Mommy, we are like this because of you. You have taught us how to live." Udoka hugged all four girls tightly. "Always stay united," she said softly. "No matter what happens in life, never allow anything to separate you." "We promise," the girls answered together. Although they lived with very little, the four sisters never complained. They shared everything they had. If one received a gift at school, she gladly shared it with the others. If one became sick, the others stayed beside her until she recovered. Their love for one another became stronger because they had experienced suffering together. At school, they were known for their good manners and excellent behavior. Teachers often praised them for being respectful and hardworking. One afternoon, Chioma's teacher called her aside after class. "Your mother should be very proud of you," the teacher said. "You are always polite, you work hard, and you help your classmates without expecting anything in return." Chioma smiled humbly. "Thank you, Ma. My mother always tells us that good character is more valuable than anything Mono can buy." The teacher nodded with admiration. "She has raised you well." The same praise followed Ujungwa, Chidinma, and Onyinye wherever they went. Even neighbors who knew the family's painful story often shook their heads in amazement. One elderly woman said, Despite everything these girls have suffered, they have not become bitter. They still greet everyone respectfully. Another neighbor replied, "That is because their mother has raised them with love instead of anger." Every evening after dinner, Udoka continued her habit of gathering the girls together for a short talk. She believed that building their hearts was just as important as feeding their stomachs. One night, she looked at them and said, "My daughters, people may insult you because you are girls. Some people may tell you that you are not important. Never believe those words." Chidinma asked quietly, "Mommy, why do some people think boys are better than girls?" Udoka smiled sadly before answering, "Some people grew up believing that, but never forget that God created both boys and girls. Your value does not come from whether you are male or female. Your value comes from your character, your hard work, and the kind of person you become." Onyie nodded. "We will always remember that." Udoka smiled proudly. "Study hard, respect people, stay away from trouble. Let your success speak for you one day." While Udoka was raising her daughters with discipline, love, and sacrifice, a completely different story was unfolding inside the main house. Kingsley, Adamson's long-awaited son, was growing up surrounded by endless praise and very little correction. From the day he was born, Adamson and Ogechi treated him as though he could never do anything wrong. Whenever he demanded expensive toys, they bought them immediately. If he refused to eat, they begged him instead of correcting him. If he broke household items, they laughed and said he is only a child. As Kingsley grew older, his behavior became more difficult, but instead of correcting him, they continued making excuses. One afternoon, a neighbor knocked on Adamson's gate looking upset. Adamson welcomed him politely. "Good afternoon, please come in." The neighbor sighed. "Sir, I came because of Kingsley." Adamson smiled confidently. "What happened?" The man replied, "Your son pushed my little boy into a drainage during a football game this afternoon." Adamson looked surprised before calling loudly, "Kingsley!" A few seconds later, the boy walked slowly. Adamson asked, "Did you push your friend into the drainage?" Kingsley shrugged his shoulders and said, "He annoyed me." Before Adamson could say anything, Ogechi interrupted. "Children fight all the time. It is nothing serious." The neighbor frowned. "Madam, my son could have been badly injured." Ogechi folded her arms. "Your own son probably started the fight." The neighbor looked disappointed. "I only came because I thought you should know." Adamson smiled awkwardly and said, "Don't worry, I will talk to him." After the neighbor left, Adamson simply looked at Kingsley and said, "Next time, be careful." Kingsley smiled carelessly and ran back outside to continue playing. Weeks later, another shop owner visited the house. "Your son took biscuits from my shop without paying," the woman complained. Adamson immediately turned towards Kingsley. "Is that true?" Kingsley lowered his head but said nothing. Ogechi quickly spoke. "He's just a little boy. Maybe he forgot." The shop owner shook her head. "This is not the first time." Adamson reached into his pocket, paid for the biscuits, and smiled apologetically. "Please forgive him." As soon as the woman left, Kingsley expected punishment, but none came. Instead, Ogechi hugged him. "Don't worry, you are still young." Kingsley smiled because he had already learnt that no matter what he did, his parents would always protect him. As the years passed, the complaints increased. Teachers reported that Kingsley disrupted lessons, bullied smaller children, refused to obey school rules, and fought with classmates. Every meeting ended the same way. The teachers spoke seriously, but Adamson and Ogechi defended their son. One teacher said firmly, "Mr. Adamson, your son is becoming difficult to control." Adamson replied, "He is just active." The teacher shook her head. "No, sir. This is beyond being active. He needs discipline." Ogechi smiled confidently. "He is only expressing himself. Boys are naturally stubborn." The teacher sighed because she realized they were refusing to see the truth. Even Collins noticed the situation. One evening, after work, he visited Adamson. As they sat together, Collins asked gently, "How is Kingsley doing?" Adamson smiled proudly. "He's fine." Collins hesitated before speaking. "I have heard a few worrying stories." Adamson frowned. "What stories?" Collins answered carefully. "People say he fights often and refuses to obey adults. Adamson waved his hand dismissively. He is only a young boy. He will mature. Collins looked directly at his friend. Please don't ignore these signs. A child who grows without discipline often becomes a problem later. Adamson laughed softly. You worry too much. Collins continued. I am serious. Correct him now while he is still young. Adamson shook his head. My son will never disappoint me. Collins sighed deeply, but realized his advice was falling on deaf ears. The years continued to pass, and sadly, Kingsley's behavior only became worse. As a teenager, he began spending more time outside the house than at home. He stopped listening to his parents completely. He made friends with older boys who were well known in the neighborhood for causing trouble. They stayed out late into the night, skipped school, and wandered around the streets looking for excitement. One evening, Udoka saw Kingsley walking into the compound with several rough-looking boys. She quietly looked at him before saying, Kingsley, it is getting late. You should go inside. Kingsley laughed disrespectfully. Mind your own business. His friends laughed loudly as they walked away. Udoka simply lowered her head and said nothing. She later prayed quietly. God, please help this child before it is too late. Soon, neighbors began whispering that Kingsley had started smoking. One afternoon, Adamson came home early from work and found Collins waiting outside the gate. Collins looked unusually serious. Adamson, I need to speak with you. Adamson smiled. What is it? Collins lowered his voice. Someone saw Kingsley smoking with a group of boys behind the market. Adamson immediately frowned. That cannot be true. Collins replied gently, Please don't ignore this. Go and investigate. Adamson called Kingsley that evening. People are saying you smoke. Kingsley shrugged carelessly. They are lying. Ogechi immediately defended him. You see, people are jealous because he is your only son. Adamson nodded slowly. I knew my son could never do such a thing. Collins later heard that nothing had changed and shook his head sadly. Before long, the rumors became reality. Kingsley not only smoked openly, but also began drinking heavily. He started staying away from home for days without informing anyone where he was. Worse still, he joined a dangerous gang that terrorized parts of the community. Fights, robberies, and other criminal activities slowly became part of his life. Then came the day every parent fears. Very early one morning, 2 police officers arrived at Adamson's house. Ogechi opened the gate nervously. Good morning, officers. Does Kingsley live here? The officer replied, Yes. Why? The officer replied, He was arrested last night with a group of young men during a criminal operation. Ogechi screamed loudly, That is impossible. Adamson rushed outside. What is happening? The officers explained everything calmly. Adamson refused to believe it at first, but when he reached the police station, he saw Kingsley sitting behind the cell bars with several other young men. His expensive clothes were dirty, and his face showed no sign of shame. Dad, Kingsley called carelessly, please get me out of here. Adamson's heart sank. He immediately hired a lawyer, paid large sums of money for legal fees and bail, and did everything possible to rescue his son. Sadly, it did not end there. Weeks later, Kingsley was arrested again after another violent incident. A few months later, another police call came, then another. Every new problem forced Adamson to spend more money, settle more complaints, and apologize to more people. The embarrassment grew heavier each time. And although he continued to rescue Kingsley from one disgrace after another, deep inside his heart, a painful question quietly began to grow, as he wondered whether all the warnings he had ignored, all the discipline he had refused to give, and all the choices he had made in raising the son he had desired so desperately were now slowly returning to confront him in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. Many more months passed, and Udoka continued living the same difficult life. Every morning, before the first light of day, she woke quietly, prepared a simple breakfast for her daughters, prayed with them, and watched them leave for school with hopeful smiles on their faces. After they were gone, she picked up her old cleaning bucket, broom, washing brush, and worn-out bag before walking from one house to another inside the estate and nearby neighborhood, ready to do whatever honest work she could find. Some days she swept large compounds until her hands became sore. Other days she spent hours washing piles of clothes by hand until her fingers wrinkled and her back ached. Sometimes she cleaned kitchens and bathrooms for busy families. On other occasions, she cooked meals, washed dishes, ironed clothes, or ran errands for elderly people who could no longer move around easily. Every evening, she returned to the boys' quarters exhausted, but she never allowed her daughters to see the weight she carried inside her heart. Instead, she smiled, asked about their day, helped them with homework whenever she could, and reminded them once again, never stop believing that your future will be better than today. One afternoon, after finishing work at a large house, Udoka slowly walked towards the local market to buy a few food items before returning home. The hot afternoon sun beat down heavily and sweat covered her face. Her faded dress showed signs of years of use. Her sandals were worn out and her once soft hands had become rough from endless labor. As she carefully carried a small bag of vegetables and a loaf of bread, she quietly prayed, "Lord, thank you for helping me survive another day. Please continue to watch over my daughters." At that very moment, a neat black car slowly stopped beside the roadside not far from where she was walking. A well-dressed woman stepped out, adjusting her handbag before walking towards one of the nearby shops. As she passed Udoka, she briefly looked at her but continued walking because she did not recognize the tired-looking woman before her. After taking a few more steps, something made her stop. She slowly turned around and looked again. There was something strangely familiar about the woman's face, despite the obvious hardship that had changed it so much. She walked back carefully and looked closely. "Excuse me," she said softly. Udoka looked up politely. "Yes, ma?" The woman stared at her for a few seconds before asking cautiously, "Are you Udoka?" Udoka looked surprised. She searched the woman's face for a moment before her eyes suddenly widened. "Cynthia?" she asked in disbelief. The two women stood frozen for a few seconds before embracing each other. Cynthia could hardly believe what she was seeing. She pulled back slightly and looked carefully at Udoka's face. "My goodness," she whispered. "Is it really you?" Udoka smiled weakly. "Yes, it is me." Cynthia shook her head in shock. "I almost walked past you. I did not recognize you." Udoka gave a small smile. "Life has changed me." Cynthia's eyes filled with concern. She remembered the elegant, confident, well-dressed young woman she had attended university with many years earlier. Back then, Udoka was always cheerful, ambitious, and full of dreams. The woman standing before her now looked completely different. Her clothes were old, her face showed years of hardship, and her body looked exhausted. Cynthia gently held Udoka's hands. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. Udoka forced a smile. "It's a long story." Cynthia immediately replied, "Then come with me. We are not standing here under this hot sun. Let us go somewhere quiet and talk." At first she hesitated. "No, Cynthia, I still have somewhere to go." Cynthia smiled kindly. "Please, it has been many years since we last saw each other. I am not taking no for an answer." Seeing the sincerity in her friend's eyes, Udoka finally nodded. "All right." Cynthia opened the passenger door of her car. "Get in." A few minutes later, they arrived at a quiet restaurant nearby. Cynthia chose a comfortable table by the window, and after they sat down, a waiter approached them. "Good afternoon, ladies. What would you like to order?" Cynthia smiled. "Please bring us 2 good meals and 2 fresh drinks." Immediately, Udoka protested. "Cynthia, you don't have to spend money on me." Cynthia gently interrupted her. "Please don't say that. Today, you are my guest." When the waiter left, the two women sat quietly for a moment. Cynthia looked carefully at Udoka once again before speaking softly. "Now, tell me, what happened?" Udoka took a deep breath. For a few seconds, she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she began speaking. "After university, I got a good job. Life was beautiful. I met a wonderful man named Adamson, and we fell deeply in love." Cynthia smiled. "I remember hearing that you got married. I was so happy for you." Udoka nodded slowly. "At first, our marriage was everything I ever dreamed of. Adamson loved me with all his heart. Everyone admired our relationship." Cynthia warmly smiled. "That sounds like the Udoka I knew." Udoka looked down at the table before continuing. "Then I became pregnant." She explained how happy they both had been when they discovered they were expecting their first child, how caring Adamson had been throughout the pregnancy, and how excited both families were. She described the birth of her first daughter and how, although Adamson smiled, she later realized he had secretly wanted a son. Cynthia listened quietly without interrupting. As the food arrived, neither of them touched it because Udoka's story had become more important than the meal before them. Slowly, she continued telling everything that had happened. She spoke about the birth of her second daughter, then the third, finally the fourth. She described how Adamson gradually changed from the loving husband she once knew into a bitter man consumed by disappointment. She explained how he constantly compared her with other women, blamed her for giving birth to daughters, and refused to accept that no woman chooses the gender of her children. Cynthia covered her mouth in shock. "He actually blamed you?" she asked. Udoka nodded sadly. Every single day. Tears slowly gathered in Cynthia's eyes as Udoka continued. She explained how Adamson eventually married another woman named Ogechi simply because he wanted a son. She described the day Ogechi gave birth to Kingsley and how Adamson celebrated as though he had finally found happiness. Then came the most painful part of the story. Udoka spoke about the insults, the humiliation, the cruel words spoken in front of the children, and the day Adamson ordered her and her 4 daughters out of the main house into the old boys' quarters behind the compound. Cynthia's eyes widened in disbelief. "He did what?" Udoka nodded as tears rolled down her cheeks. "He said the main house belonged to him, Ogechi, and their son." Cynthia could no longer hold back her emotions. Tears began running down her own face. She reached across the table and held Udoka's trembling hands tightly. "I cannot believe you have been carrying all this pain alone." Udoka smiled weakly through her tears. "I had no choice. I had to stay strong for my daughters." She continued describing how Adamson gradually stopped paying for food, school fees, clothes, and medical bills until she was forced to survive using the savings she had kept from her former office job. She explained how those savings eventually finished, forcing her to sweep compounds, wash clothes, clean houses, run food for strangers, and run errands just to keep her daughters alive and in school. Cynthia quietly wiped away her tears with a tissue. "Udoka," she whispered, "why didn't you ever look for me?" Udoka looked down sadly. "I lost contact with many people after my marriage. Besides, I was ashamed. I didn't want anyone to see me like this." Cynthia immediately shook her head. "Ashamed? Never! You have nothing to be ashamed of. You fought for your children with honest work. That is something to be proud of." Udoka remained silent as fresh tears rolled down her face. Cynthia squeezed her hand gently. "Listen to me carefully. You are not alone anymore." Udoka looked up at her friend. Cynthia continued. "My husband is currently living and working in the United States. Because of his work, he has been away for some time, and I am living alone in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment." Udoka looked surprised but said nothing. Cynthia smiled warmly. "I have more than enough space. I want you and your daughters to move in with me." Udoka immediately shook her head. "No, Cynthia, I cannot become a burden." Cynthia smiled and interrupted her. "You are not a burden. You are my friend. We studied together, laughed together, and shared our dreams together. If our positions were reversed, I know you would do exactly the same for me." Udoka lowered her head as tears flowed freely. "I don't even know how to thank you." Cynthia stood up from her chair, walked around the table, and hugged her tightly. "You don't have to thank me. Friends are meant to stand beside each other, especially during difficult times." A few days later, Cynthia personally drove to the compound where Udoka lived. When she saw the tiny boys' quarters where her friend and the 4 girls had been struggling to survive, her heart broke all over again. She quietly helped them pack their few belongings into her car. As the girls looked around nervously, Cynthia smiled warmly and said, "From today, you are all coming home with me." Chioma looked at her mother. "Mommy, is this true?" Udoka smiled through her tears. "Yes, my dear." The girls hugged one another with excitement because for the first time in many years, they felt as though hope had finally knocked on their door. Life inside Cynthia's apartment was completely different. The girls each had comfortable places to sleep, proper meals every day, and a peaceful environment where they could study without fear or humiliation. Cynthia treated them with kindness and respect, making them feel welcome from the very first day. She often encouraged them by saying, "Never allow your past to decide your future." The girls admired her greatly, and Udoka thanked God every night for sending such a wonderful friend back into her life. Cynthia, however, believed that providing shelter alone was not enough. She wanted Udoka to stand on her own feet again. Quietly, she began making inquiries through former colleagues and professional friends. She updated Udoka's curriculum vitae, contacted several companies, made phone calls, and recommended her wherever suitable opportunities appeared. Some interviews were unsuccessful, but Cynthia refused to give up. "Your time will come," she encouraged Udoka after every disappointment. Finally, a few months later, one of Cynthia's professional contacts called with good news. A respectable company needed an experienced office administrator, and after reviewing Udoka's qualifications and previous work experience, they invited her for an interview. Cynthia smiled proudly as she handed Udoka the interview details. "Go and show them who you truly are." Udoka attended the interview with confidence, answered every question honestly, and a few days later received the phone call that changed her life once again. She had been offered the job. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she rushed home with tears of joy, embraced Cynthia tightly, and thanked her over and over again, because after years of humiliation, hardship, and painful sacrifice, she had finally been given an opportunity to begin rebuilding the life she had lost so many years before. After securing her new office job with Cynthia's help, Udoka felt as though God had opened a brand new chapter in her life. For the first time in many years, she no longer woke up wondering where the next meal would come from. Although her salary was not enormous, it was enough to pay the family's bills, keep her daughters in school, and slowly begin rebuilding the future that had almost been stolen from them. She remained careful with every naira she earned. She no longer spent money carelessly because she understood the value of every coin. Each month, after paying for food, transportation, and other important needs, she saved whatever little money remained. One evening, as the family gathered around the dining table in Cynthia's apartment after dinner, Udoka looked at her daughters with a smile. "My children," she said gently, "our lives are becoming better, but this is only the beginning. I want every one of you to build a future that nobody can take away from you." Chioma smiled and replied, "We will continue to work hard, Mommy." Ujuma nodded confidently. "Everything you have sacrificed for us will never be wasted." Chidinma held her mother's hand. "You taught us never to give up." Little Onyinye smiled brightly. "One day we will make you proud." Udoka's eyes became wet with tears as she looked at the four young women sitting before her. She remembered the nights they had gone to bed hungry inside the boys' quarters, the long days she had spent washing clothes and sweeping compounds, and the countless times she had cried silently after everyone had fallen asleep. Looking at her daughters now, she whispered, "God has truly been faithful." The years passed quickly, and the girls continued growing into intelligent, disciplined, and hard-working young women. Their good character remained unchanged despite everything they had experienced. Teachers admired them, neighbors respected them, and everyone who met them spoke highly of their manners. One afternoon, after receiving excellent examination results, Chioma came home carrying her admission letter with trembling hands. She entered the sitting room where Udoka and Cynthia were talking. "Mommy!" she called excitedly. Udoka looked up immediately. "What is it?" Without saying a word, Chioma handed her the letter. Udoka adjusted her glasses and began reading. Suddenly, her eyes widened. "Medical school?" she whispered. Chioma nodded excitedly. "Yes, Mommy. I have been admitted to study medicine." For a moment, Udoka could not speak. She simply hugged her daughter tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. "You are going to become a doctor," she whispered proudly. Cynthia clapped happily. I knew you could do it." Chioma smiled through her tears. "Thank you for believing in me." That evening, they celebrated with a simple homemade dinner, laughing and thanking God for opening another door. Not long afterwards, Ujunwa also received wonderful news. She had gained admission into law school. She ran into the apartment holding her admission letter high in the air. "Mommy," she shouted, "guess what?" Udoka laughed. "Tell me." Ujunwa handed her the letter with excitement. Udoka read it slowly before smiling proudly. "Law school?" Ujunwa nodded. "Yes." Udoka embraced her tightly. "I am so proud of you." Cynthia smiled warmly as she watched the family celebrating together. "Look at what perseverance can achieve," she said quietly. As the years continued, Udoka carefully supported both daughters throughout their studies. Although paying tuition fees and buying books was not always easy, she refused to give up. She often reminded them, education is one investment that will never disappoint you. Meanwhile, Chidinma and Oyinye discovered that their dreams followed different paths. Chidinma loved styling hair from a young age. Whenever neighbors visited, she enjoyed helping braid hair or suggesting new styles. One afternoon, she sat beside her mother and said, "Mommy, I know university is not my dream. I want to become a professional hairdresser." Udoka smiled kindly. "There is nothing wrong with that, my daughter. Honest work is honorable. If you are willing to work hard, I will support you." Chidinma hugged her happily. "Thank you, Mommy." Around the same time, Onye developed a deep love for fashion and sewing. She spent hours sketching beautiful dresses in old notebooks and often altered worn-out clothes to make them look new again. One evening, she nervously approached Udoka. "Mommy, may I tell you something?" Udoka smiled. "Of course." Onye took a deep breath. "I want to become a fashion designer." Udoka held her hands and smiled proudly. "Then become the best fashion designer you can be." Cynthia laughed softly. "This family is full of talented women." Soon afterwards, Chidinma enrolled in a respected professional hairdressing academy, while Onyinye began formal training as a fashion designer. Although their dreams were different from those of their older sisters, Udoka treated every career with equal respect. She constantly reminded all four daughters, success does not come from choosing the same path. Success comes from doing your best wherever God places you. The years rolled by, filled with hard work, determination, examinations, sleepless nights, and countless prayers. Finally, the day Udoka had dreamed about for so many years arrived. Chioma graduated from medical school as a qualified medical doctor. During the graduation ceremony, she proudly walked across the stage wearing her graduation gown, while the audience applauded loudly. Sitting among the guests, Udoka could no longer hold back her tears. Cynthia gently squeezed her hand and said, "Why are you crying?" she whispered with a smile. Udoka laughed through her tears. "These are tears of joy." Cynthia smiled warmly. "You deserve this moment." After receiving her certificate, Chioma walked directly towards her mother. Without saying a word, she knelt before Udoka and handed her the certificate. "This belongs to you, Mommy," she said emotionally. "Without your sacrifices, none of this would have been possible." Udoka quickly lifted her up and embraced her tightly. "No, my daughter, you worked hard for this." Chioma smiled through her tears. "I only finished the race because you never stopped believing in me." Everyone around them clapped as mother and daughter held each other tightly. Not long afterwards, another joyful day arrived when Ujunwa graduated successfully from law school and officially became a qualified lawyer. Once again, Udoka and Cynthia proudly attended the ceremony. As Ujunwa received her qualification, she looked into the crowd until she found her mother's face. Their eyes met and both of them smiled through tears. After the ceremony, Ujunwa hugged Udoka tightly. "Mommy," she whispered, "every courtroom I stand in will remind me of everything you endured for us." Udoka gently wiped her daughter's tears. "Always use your knowledge to help people." Cynthia stood beside them, smiling proudly. "Today, I feel like all four of us have become mothers to this family." The celebrations continued because the victories belonged to everyone who refused to give up. A few months later, another wonderful opportunity appeared. Cynthia's husband, who had been living and working in the United States for many years, heard about Chioma and Ujunwa's outstanding achievements. Through his professional connections, he introduced them to organizations looking for qualified professionals. After several interviews and careful preparations, both young women received excellent employment opportunities in the United States. The day they received the confirmation letters, they rushed home with excitement. "Mommy," Chioma shouted, "we got the jobs!" Ujunwa hugged her mother. "We are going to America!" Udoka covered her mouth with both hands as tears of gratitude filled her eyes once again. "God has remembered us," she whispered. Cynthia smiled proudly. "I always knew this day would come." Before leaving Nigeria, both daughters knelt before Udoka. Chioma held her mother's hands and said, "Everything we become is because you never give up on us." Ujunwa added, "We promise you something today. You will never suffer again." Udoka hugged them both tightly. "Go and make us proud. Remain humble. Never forget where you came from." A few weeks later, they boarded their flight and relocated to the United States, where they began building successful careers. Chioma worked as a medical doctor, earning respect through her dedication and compassion, while Ujunwa established herself as a successful lawyer, admired for her intelligence and integrity. Although they now lived thousands of miles away, they never forgot their mother or their sisters back home. Every week, they called home through video calls. "Mommy, have you eaten?" Chioma will ask. Udoka smiled. "Yes, my dear." Ujunwa laughed. "Remember, if you don't take care of yourself, we will come back and supervise you." Everyone laughed together. Meanwhile, back in Nigeria, Chidima and Onyinye worked tirelessly to grow their own dreams. Chidima opened a small hair salon after completing her professional training. At first, she had only a few customers, but her skill, honesty, and friendly attitude quickly attracted more people. Soon the salon became too small for the growing number of clients. At the same time, Onyinye started sewing clothes for neighbors and friends. Her beautiful designs spread by word of mouth, and before long she had more orders than she could handle alone. Their sisters in America regularly sent financial support home. "Use this money to expand the salon," Chioma told Chidima during one phone call. "Don't be afraid to dream bigger." Ujuma also encouraged Oyini, "Buy better sewing machines and employ more people. Your talent deserves to grow." With their sisters' support and their own determination, both businesses expanded steadily. Chidima transformed her small salon into a respected beauty center with several employees, while Ujunwa opened a successful fashion house where customers traveled from different towns to have clothes designed. People began speaking about the four sisters with admiration. "Look at those daughters everyone once rejected. Today they are making their mother proud." Another replied, "Their success is proof that hard work and good upbringing matter more than gender." As the years continued, the sisters gathered and made another important decision. During a family video call, Chioma smiled and said, "Our mother has suffered enough." Ujunwa nodded. "It is time for her to enjoy life." Chidima added, "She should never have to worry about rent again." Oyinye smiled excitedly. "Let's build her a beautiful house." Everyone agreed immediately. Together, they contributed money, bought a large piece of land in a peaceful neighborhood, and supervised the construction of a beautiful modern home. Month after month, they carefully planned every detail, choosing strong materials, spacious rooms, and a lovely garden, because they wanted her mother to finally experience the comfort she had been denied for so many years. When the house was completed, they brought Udoka to see it without telling her what awaited her. As she stood outside the beautiful building, she looked around in confusion. "Why are we here?" she asked. The four daughters smiled at one another before Chioma gently placed a set of keys into her mother's hands. "Mommy," she said softly, "this house belongs to you." Udoka stared at the keys before looking back at the house. "What do you mean?" Ujunwa smiled through tears. "We built it for you." Chidima hugged her tightly. "This is our way of saying thank you." Onyinye wiped away her tears. "You gave us everything when you had nothing. Now it is our turn to take care of you." Udoka burst into tears and embraced all four daughters at once. She could hardly speak through her emotion. Thank you, my children." From that day onward, her daughters made sure she wanted for nothing. They furnished the house beautifully, paid every bill, ensured she had comfortable clothes, good food, proper health care, and all the peace she had long been denied. For the first time in many years, Udoka no longer woke up worried about survival. Instead, she spent her days surrounded by the love, respect, and honor of the 4 daughters whom so many people had once considered worthless, finally enjoying the peace, stability, happiness, and priceless reward that came from years of unwavering faith, endless sacrifice, and a mother's determination to never give up on the children the world had rejected. Many years passed, and the difference between the two families became clearer with each new day. Inside Udoka's beautiful new home, there was peace, laughter, love, and unity. Her daughters remained close to one another no matter how busy life became. Chioma continued building a successful career as a medical doctor in the United States, where she became known for her compassion and dedication to her patients. Ujonwa also established herself as a respected lawyer, earning the admiration of both her colleagues and clients because of her honesty and hard work. Back in Nigeria, Chidima's beauty business expanded beyond anything she had imagined. She employed several young women, trained many apprentices, and became an inspiration to girls who wanted to build honest careers. Onye's fashion business also grew into a well-known brand, with customers traveling from different cities to have their clothes designed by her. Every achievement made Udoka's heart overflow with gratitude. She often sat quietly in the garden of the house her daughters had built for her, looking up at the sky and whispering, "Thank you, Lord. You never abandoned me." While peace filled Udoka's home, the opposite was happening inside Adamason's household. Kingsley, the son Adamason had sacrificed everything to obtain, continued making one terrible decision after another. His drinking became worse, his smoking turned into drug abuse, and the dangerous friend he had chosen drew him deeper into criminal activities. Almost every few months, another embarrassing incident occurred. Sometimes the police called Adamason in the middle of the night. Other times, angry neighbors arrived at his gate complaining that Kingsley had damaged property, assaulted someone, or participated in another crime. Each new problem left Adamason more exhausted than before. One rainy evening, while Adamason and Ogechi were preparing for bed, his mobile phone rang loudly. He looked at the screen and sighed deeply. "It is an unknown number," he said. As soon as he answered, a serious voice spoke. "Good evening. Am I speaking with Mr. Adamason?" "Yes. This is the police station. Your son, Kingsley, has been arrested again." Adamason closed his eyes slowly. "What happened this time?" The officer replied, "He was found with a group involved in armed robbery investigations. Please come to the station." Adamason dropped the phone onto the table and buried his face in his hands. Ogechi looked frightened. "What did they say?" Adamason answered weakly, "Kingsley has been arrested again." Ogechi immediately began crying. "Not again." They rushed to the police station, where they found Kingsley sitting inside another cell with several young men. His clothes were dirty, his eyes were red, and he looked completely different from the innocent little boy they had once celebrated. Adamason stood silently in front of the cell for several seconds before speaking. "Kingsley, what have you done to yourself?" Kingsley shrugged carelessly. "Just get me out of here." Adamason looked at him in disbelief. "Is that all you have to say?" Kingsley turned away without answering. Once again, Adamason spent a huge amount of money hiring lawyers, paying legal fees, and trying to settle the matter before it became even more serious. When they finally returned home, he sat quietly in the living room long after everyone had gone to bed. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to think honestly about his life. He remembered the happy home he once shared with Udoka. He remembered how she had loved him faithfully, how she had stood beside him through every difficulty, and how their 4 daughters had always greeted him with excitement whenever he came home from work. Then he remembered every cruel word he had spoken, every tear Udoka had shed, every insult he had thrown at his daughters, and the day he forced them into the boys' quarters. He covered his face with both hands as tears slowly rolled down his cheeks. "What have I done?" he whispered. The following morning, Collins visited him after hearing about Kingsley's latest arrest. When he entered the sitting room, he immediately noticed how tired Adamason looked. "My friend," Collins said gently, "how are you?" Adamason looked up with red eyes. "I am not all right." Collins sat beside him. "I am sorry about everything that is happening." Adamason remained silent for a few moments before finally speaking. "Do you remember all the advice you gave me?" Collins nodded slowly. "Yes." Adamason lowered his head in shame. "You were right." Collins sighed quietly but said nothing. Adamason continued speaking through tears. "I destroyed my own family with my own hands. I chased away the wife who truly loved me. I rejected 4 wonderful daughters simply because they were girls. I thought having a son would solve all my problems. Instead," he looked around the silent house before finishing his sentence. "Instead, I destroyed everything." Collins placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The past cannot be changed, but you can still admit your mistakes." Adamason nodded slowly. "I need to find Udoka." A few days later, after making several inquiries through old friends and former neighbors, Adamason finally discovered where Udoka was living. When he stood outside her beautiful house, he could hardly believe his eyes. The woman he had once pushed into poverty now lived in a home more beautiful than the one he had shared with Ogechi. His hands trembled as he walked slowly towards the gate. After ringing the bell, a security guard opened it politely. "Good afternoon. Who are you here to see?" Adamason cleared his throat. "Please tell Madame Udoka that Adamason is here." A few minutes later, Udoka walked calmly towards the entrance. She looked confident, peaceful, and elegant. Years of suffering had been replaced by quiet dignity. When Adamason saw her, tears immediately filled his eyes. Udoka looked at him calmly before saying, "Please come inside." They sat together in the sitting room in complete silence for several moments. Finally, Adamson broke the silence. "Udoka," his voice trembled. "I don't even know where to begin." Udoka simply listened quietly. Adamson wiped his eyes. "I came here because I owe you an apology." He paused as tears rolled down his face. "I have done terrible things to you." Udoka remained silent. Adamson continued. "You loved me when I had nothing. You gave me beautiful children. You stood beside me faithfully. But I became blind." He covered his face with his hands as he cried openly. "My obsession with having a son destroyed everything God had already given me." Udoka quietly handed him a handkerchief. Adamson accepted it with shaking hands. "I insulted you. I humiliated you. I rejected our daughters. I pushed you into that boy's quarters. I abandoned all of you because I believed only a son mattered." He looked directly into her eyes. "Please forgive me." Tears slowly gathered in Udoka's eyes, but they were not tears of anger. They were tears of compassion for a broken man who had finally seen the truth. She spoke softly. "Udoka, I forgave you a long time ago." Adamson looked at her with surprise. "You did?" Udoka nodded gently. "Yes, carrying bitterness would only have destroyed my own heart. I chose forgiveness because I wanted peace." Adamson lowered his head. "Thank you." After a brief silence, he spoke again. Would you come back home?" Udoka looked at him kindly before shaking her head. "No, Adamson." He looked up slowly. Udoka continued speaking gently. "Forgiveness and returning are not the same thing. I have rebuilt my life. I have found peace again. I have regained my dignity. I cannot go back to the painful chapter I left behind." Adamson quietly wiped away fresh tears. Udoka smiled sadly. "Please remain with Ogechi. She is your wife now, and Kingsley is your son. Take responsibility for the family you chose. Adamson nodded slowly because he knew she was right. Before leaving, he stood up and said quietly, "Thank you for showing me kindness, even after everything I did." Udoka smiled gently. "May God help you find peace." A few days later, Adamson also met with his 4 daughters. As soon as he saw them, he broke down in tears. "My daughters," he whispered, "I don't deserve to call you that after the way I treated you." Chioma stepped forward and gently held his hand. "You are still our father." Adamson cried even harder. "Can you ever forgive me?" Ujoma smiled softly. "Our mother taught us never to hate." Chidima added, "The past was painful." Onye finished the sentence quietly. "But we chose forgiveness instead of bitterness." Adamson embraced all 4 daughters as tears flowed freely from his eyes. At that moment, he realized that the children he had once called useless possessed more love and character than he had ever deserved. Time continued moving forward. One after another, the 4 sisters found loving husbands who respected, cherished, and appreciated them for the wonderful women they had become. Their weddings were joyful celebrations filled with laughter, gratitude, and happy tears. During each ceremony, the husbands publicly thanked Udoka for raising such remarkable women. One groom smiled warmly during his speech and said, "The woman who raised my wife deserves my deepest respect because she taught her strength, kindness, and integrity." Another added, "Today, I am not only gaining a wife, I am becoming part of a family built on love and perseverance." As the years passed, grandchildren began filling Udoka's home with laughter. Little feet once again ran through the hallways, joyful voices echoed around the house, and every holiday brought the entire family together. Her daughters visited often, whether from abroad or within Nigeria, making sure she never felt lonely. Sometimes they all gathered around the dining table, laughing as they shared old memories. One evening, while watching her grandchildren play in the garden, Udoka smiled quietly. Chioma sat beside her and gently held her hand. "Mommy," she said softly, "are you happy?" Udoka looked at the children running across the grass before answering with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "More than happy. God has given me more than I ever imagined." Ujunwa smiled. "You deserve every bit of this joy." Chidima hugged her mother from behind. "Everything we are today is because you never gave up." Onye kissed her mother's cheek and whispered, "You are our greatest blessing." Udoka looked at all 4 daughters, then at her grandchildren, and finally lifted her eyes toward heaven. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. "You carried me through every storm." The pain she had once endured was now only a distant memory, replaced by peace, dignity, love, and gratitude. The daughters her husband had once rejected became the greatest pride of her life, proving beyond every doubt that a child's true worth is never measured by gender, but by character, love, and purpose, and that those who remain faithful, refuse to give up, and continue doing what is right will one day discover that God's blessings often arrive in ways far greater than they ever imagined. The lesson from this story is that every child is a priceless gift, whether a boy or a girl, and judging a child's worth by gender can destroy families and lead to lifelong regret. Love, good character, discipline, education, and perseverance are what truly shape a person's future, not whether they are male or female. Parents should treat all their children with equal love, raise them with wisdom and discipline, and never allow unhealthy desires or societal expectations to blind them to the blessings they already have. Above all, this story teaches that kindness, forgiveness, hard work, and unwavering faith can turn seasons of pain into testimonies of joy, proving that those who remain faithful, refuse to give up, and continue doing what is right will one day discover that God's blessings often arrive in ways far greater than they ever imagined. Thanks for watching this amazing story on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.